They always say they're not ready for love. They need space. They need time. They need to figure themselves out. But the truth? They were never afraid of love. They were afraid of what love would reveal about themselves. And you were the mirror that got too clear, too honest, too steady, too kind, too available. That kind of presence, to someone who's never truly known it, feels like danger. You loved them in a way they weren't ready to feel. So they did what they've always done. They pulled away. They minimized. They rationalized. They told themselves, this isn't it. It's not the right time. You're too much. But now they're the ones haunted, not by what you said, but by what you didn't say when you walked away. Not by your presence, but by your silence after they took it for granted. Not by your neediness, but by your self-respect once it finally arrived. They don't chase when you cry. They don't move when you beg. But the moment you detach, not just physically, but emotionally, they feel the earth shift beneath them. It's not because they suddenly became enlightened. It's not because they found God or read a book on attachment theory. It's because the energy that fed their illusion of control vanished, and the part of them that secretly needed you, the part they never spoke of, the one buried beneath their defenses, the one they denied and dismissed and disowned, wakes up. Avoidants don't chase you because you begged. They chase you because you stopped explaining, stopped performing, stopped waiting for them to grow. And when your absence becomes quieter than your presence ever was, they start to hear everything they've been trying not to feel. So here's the great paradox. Why do avoidants resist the very thing they'll one day crave? Why do they abandon connection, only to return once you no longer need it? Why does your detachment finally get their attention? To understand this shift, we need to dive below the surface, beyond the text messages, beyond the cold looks, beyond the casual words like, I just don't know. We need to go deeper, to the roots of fear, to the shadows of childhood, to the unspoken grief that shaped their nervous system long before you ever arrived. Because this story was never just about you and them. It was about what they learned to run from, long before they learned your name. And the moment you stopped chasing, you stopped feeding the pattern, that's where it all began to change. They didn't pull away because you were too much. That's just the surface level excuse. Defense mechanism that protected their fragile inner world from what it means to truly feel. The truth goes deeper, far beneath the cold silences, the missed calls, and the excuses cloaked in vague discomfort. Because what avoidants fear most is not abandonment. It's intimacy. It's not that they couldn't handle your presence. It's that they couldn't handle what your presence awakened in them. Your love wasn't overwhelming. It was confronting. It mirrored back to them the very hunger they buried long ago. The ache for safety, for connection, for emotional holding. But somewhere along their journey, those needs became threats. Because they were never met in the form they deserved. So they learned to cope in silence, to detach, to numb, to perform self-reliance so convincingly that even they began to believe it. But then you came along, and you didn't play the role they were prepared for. You didn't try to force closeness or beg for attention. You weren't just another person seeking validation. You saw them. You made them feel known. And that's what began to tear at their armor. Because suddenly, the mask no longer fit. Here's what most people don't realize. The avoidant doesn't run from you. They run from the part of themselves that awakens in your presence. They've built their life around a kind of controlled emotional distance. A life where they never have to confront the messy chaos of feeling deeply. That distance keeps their trauma quiet, their fear asleep, and their shame untouched. But the moment you get too close, the old strategies begin to falter. Why? Because connection, real, vulnerable connection isn't safe to someone who never learned love without conditions. Maybe they grew up in a home where affection was offered only when they performed, obeyed, or suppressed. Maybe their needs were neglected or mocked. Maybe their emotional world was too big for the people who were supposed to nurture it. So they learned subconsciously that needing love made them weak. That closeness would always lead to disappointment. It's not that they don't feel, it's that their nervous system interprets intimacy as danger. Their earliest blueprint of love encoded proximity as pain, vulnerability as exposure, and emotional reliance as humiliation. And so when you offered them kindness without conditions, it wasn't soothing. It was disorienting. It broke their script. Because a part of them still believes, if I let someone close, I will lose myself. And yet, there you were. Proof that love could be something else. Proof that someone could see them, choose them, and not ask them to shrink in return. And so the war inside them began. The push and pull, the silence and the longing. The disappearing act followed by the haunted scrolls through your old messages. What makes avoidance run isn't cruelty, it's fear. Not just fear of love, but fear of being known in a way they no longer know how to accept. But when you shift, when you stop chasing, when you stop making their comfort your responsibility, when you stop over-functioning to maintain a connection they keep retreating from, that's when something powerful happens. You're no longer validating their belief that love requires self-betrayal. You're no longer holding their emotional world for them. You're handing it back, and with it, a mirror. One that reflects the absence they created. One that makes them face the internal void they've spent a lifetime running from. And for the first time, they don't feel free. They feel lost. Because this wasn't how the script was supposed to end. This is the hidden root of their panic. Not your silence, not your strength, but the shift inside you. The shift from proving to protecting, from seeking to seeing, from trying to earn love, to embodying it. And once you make that shift, everything changes. At first, they don't notice the shift. They assume your silence is temporary, just another emotional protest. They've seen this before, haven't they? People get hurt, pull away, wait for them to reach out, then eventually come back, hoping things will be different. But this time, you don't. You don't reach out. You don't orbit them with anxious energy. You don't leave breadcrumbs of affection just to remind them you're still there. And suddenly, your silence becomes unbearable, not because you're playing a game, but because you've stopped playing theirs. They begin replaying the last message you sent. The words weren't dramatic. You didn't beg, accuse, or plead. You simply expressed truth. With grace, with clarity, and with peace. And that's what haunts them most. It was the tone of someone who meant it. The kind of message someone sends when they finally realize their worth isn't negotiable. This is the moment the avoidance mind begins to spiral. They told themselves for so long. That closeness felt like suffocation. That distance was peace. But now, the silence feels different. It doesn't bring relief. It brings restlessness. They scroll through your old conversations, not for entertainment, but for meaning. They analyze your voice notes. They revisit the way you saw them, the way your words held their inner world, with tenderness they never knew they needed. And that's when it begins to hit. You weren't trying to fix them. You weren't trying to own them. You were trying to meet them, fully, softly, in a place they never let anyone go. But they weren't ready. So they pushed it away. They minimized it, laughed it off, said they just need space. And at the time, they really believed it. But now, they're waking up to the cost. The cost of losing someone who didn't want to change them, just love them. The cost of projecting their fears onto a connection that only ever wanted to hold them. And here's where the deeper consequence unfolds. Not just in their relationship with you, but in their relationship with themselves. Because they've been conditioned to equate withdrawal with control, to believe that the more detached they are, the more power they hold. But when you finally let go, not in anger, but in wholeness, that illusion collapses. Suddenly, they're not in control. They're consumed by the very memories they tried to silence. They begin to romanticize the smallest details. Your laugh in the kitchen, the way your eyes softened when you listened, the way you paused before speaking so you could respond, not react, the way you stayed present, even when they pulled away. And now they realize your presence wasn't pressure. It was safety, but it's too late to unsee what they've seen. Because now, the attachment pattern that once protected them has turned on them. The avoidance strategy that once made them feel powerful now feels hollow. That space they once craved, it's become an echo chamber. And in that space, it's not freedom they find. It's your absence. An absence that speaks louder than all their justifications combined. They don't know how to say it, but somewhere deep down, they finally feel it. They abandon gold for dust. And now, the shadow won't let them rest. The ghost of the connection they once feared is now the very thing they long to reclaim. But reclaiming it means confronting the part of themselves they've never faced. You don't realize it right away, but something inside you has changed too, because you're no longer reaching toward a version of love that requires your abandonment to survive. You're no longer performing emotional CPR on someone who keeps running from their own pulse. You've stepped off the roller coaster. And that is the move that makes them feel your absence, not just in their mind, but in their soul. Avoidants don't chase because you guilt them. They chase because you stop chasing them. Because for the first time, they can no longer define the relationship by the distance they keep. You've stripped them of the power they once held, not out of revenge, but out of clarity, out of the kind of self-honoring that says, I still care, but I'm not waiting for you to see it. This is rebellion, not against them, but against the old pattern that kept you stuck in emotional limbo. You've stopped begging for breadcrumbs from someone who was never taught how to share a full meal. You've stopped confusing their fear of closeness with your unworthiness. You've stopped making their coldness mean you were too much. And that shift sends a message louder than anything you could ever text. I won't teach you how to love me by abandoning myself. Now something unusual happens. They begin to feel safe with the very thing that once scared them, your strength. Because your stillness isn't cold, it's centered. Your boundaries aren't walls, they're clarity. Your lack of reaction isn't indifference, it's healing. They're not used to that. They're used to love being dramatic, explosive, conditional. But you showed them something different. And it's that difference that now plays like a quiet melody in their memory. Over and over, on a loop they can't stop. Because you didn't punish them. You didn't slam the door. You simply stopped knocking. And in the echo of your silence, they now hear the truth they've never been brave enough to face. It wasn't that you were too much. It was that they were too scared. Scared to stay. Scared to feel. Scared to risk being known. But now, the very intimacy they once rejected feels magnetic. Not because it's changed, but because you have. You've become the kind of person who can walk away with peace, not punishment. The kind of person who can hold compassion without collapsing into someone else's chaos. The kind of person whose presence is so rare, it lingers long after you're gone. That's what makes avoidance come back. Not your pain, not your pleas, your peace. The way you stopped proving, chasing, and over-explaining. The way you stood in your own truth. even if it meant standing alone. And now, they're left wondering, did I misread them? Did I push away someone who was actually safe? Did I mistake my own fears for red flags? These questions haunt them because they weren't expecting you to change. They thought you'd wait. But now, they feel something they've spent their entire life avoiding: regret. And not just over losing you, but over never truly letting themselves be seen by someone who saw them anyway. They always thought they'd have time to figure it out, time to make sense of their feelings, time to come back, if they ever decided they wanted to. But the human psyche rarely offers such clean resolution, especially when pride, fear, and suppressed longing all live in the same house. So when someone like you leaves, not in anger, but in love, not with fire, but with finality, that's when the shadow begins its slow descent. Not just because you're gone, but because the reflection they ran from now stares back at them in their own solitude. Here's the truth no avoidant wants to face. They didn't lose you because you stopped caring. They lost you because you finally started caring about yourself. You stopped making room for their silence. You stopped shrinking to avoid setting off their alarm bells. You stopped mistaking their absence for a challenge instead of a message. And in doing so, you became something far more powerful than desirable. You became unforgettable because you gave them a taste of something they didn't know they were hungry for. A love that didn't control, a presence that didn't perform, a connection that asked for truth, not theatrics. That kind of love rewires the nervous system. It doesn't create addiction, it creates awareness. And awareness always lingers, even if they run, even if they date someone else, even if they convince themselves they're over it. They're not haunted by your face. They're haunted by the version of themselves that was almost brave enough to meet you fully. They're haunted by the question, what if I had just stayed? And that question doesn't disappear. It gets louder in silence. It echoes through the very avoidance that once protected them, because now they've tasted what it's like to be seen, held, invited, not chased, challenged, not controlled, loved, not managed. And that's the wound that doesn't close. So no, you don't need to prove anything anymore. Your absence is loud. Your peace is louder. And your growth is deafening. The version of you that longed to be chosen, that chapter is over. The version of you that needs their return to feel whole, already buried. And if they ever do come back, you'll greet them not with desperation, but discernment, because the real prize was never them. It was you. The version of you that stayed loyal to your truth. The version that stopped bending for fear-based love. The version that finally saw yourself as someone worth staying for. If you're still listening, this is your moment. Let this be the sign you needed. Stop chasing people who are terrified of the very love you offer. Reclaim your center. Rewrite the story. And remember, you were never too much. They were just never ready for someone real. If this message stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe for more videos that speak to the parts of you no one else sees. Share your story in the comments, or drop a red heart if you felt this in your soul. Because you're not alone. And this time, you don't have to heal in silence.